Brendan Burns.
Thank you. I'm pleased to rise and support the introduction of the Christ College Canterbury Amendment Bill. As my colleague Trevor Mallard has indicated, the Labor opposition is quite prepared to see this bill go to the Government Administration Select Committee, though we have some questions about the detail of it. Christ's College is a venerable institution in Christchurch. It has a proud 160-year-old history. It's had a number of distinguished pupils. I think of a former member of this House, Dr. Michael Cullen, amongst the alumni of that school.
Yeah, I think he mentioned it in his
I think he did. He got a very good education at Christ College, courtesy of others in the community, as I recall. Christ College sits on the edge of Hagley Park in our city of Christchurch, and it sits within my electorate of Christchurch Central. The world has moved on since Dr. Cullen was a pupil, and the school is left with a number of trusts which have purposes no longer fit for current pupils, and hence this amending legislation. I was very pleased to visit Christ College last year with Phil Goff, and noted that the school had perhaps the best broadband and ICT infrastructure in the country in place, a feat that I'm sure every other school in New Zealand would like to emulate, and one day soon may be. But the point is that there are trusts established for purposes that are no longer appropriate. I should imagine things like Greek and Latin might be supported by some of these trusts, and with all due deference to my excellent parliamentary executive assistant, perhaps Greek isn't the highest priority order in today's world. This bill has its parallels with another bill which I was very pleased to see through the House for another institution headquartered in my electorate of Christchurch Central, and that is the Methodist Church of New Zealand. We last year passed through the Methodist Church of New Zealand Trusts Amendment Bill, which had a similar issue. It had a number of trusts left by legacy, by bequest, which were no longer appropriate. In that instance around the issue of orphanages, which that church no longer runs. And so instead of having to go to the High Court for an amendment on each of those numerous trusts, an all-purpose bill was introduced in my name. So this bill has the same approach. It'll be authorising the governing body of the college to apply for changes to trusts and to use those trusts for more appropriate and fitting purposes, still in keeping with the original intention of the donor or bequeather of the monies. There are some concerns around just exactly how those trusts will be wound up and how those funds would be passed across. That was at the core of some considerable discussion and debate through the Finance and Expenditure Committee with the Methodist Church Trusts Bill. Indeed, in that instance, we passed amendments, and I recall a member opposite from Selwyn was quite instrumental in insisting that there should be some considerable vetting and change in relation to making amendments to trust deeds. Obviously, a very, very important principle is at stake when somebody has defined a particular purpose for a trust. To amend those is not something that one would traverse lightly, and in the case of the Methodist Church, all changes firstly needed to be referred to the Attorney General, and secondly, trustees, where changes were being proposed, were to be consulted. So that's the sort of change that we might be looking at in the Select Committee process, just to be absolutely assured that while we're providing for increased flexibility for Christ College, that the original purpose and intent is indeed being maintained by the changes being introduced. I would like to just pick up, though, on the comments that my colleague Trevor Mallard made around national standards, and indeed he's correct. Christ College is a school which is exempt as a non-state school from the introduction of national standards, and that is a curiosity. And does it say that the school does not believe it needs to meet national standards, or does it mean, as I think may be the case, it believes that it's already well above those standards? But whatever it is an exemption that raises a question about why other schools cannot have exemptions, why we do not go down the line of looking at a trial, as the NZEI and other good organisations are suggesting, why the government is so adamant that it will have these standards introduced across the board, except in private schools, except in kura kaupapa, and it does beg the question as why they should get exemptions. But nonetheless, in reference to this bill, the Labor opposition is very prepared to support this bill to the Select Committee for some fine-tuning in the process.